Welcome to this video tutorial. In this video, we will complete a short exercise to create our own walk the plank experience. Walk the plank experience is a very nice way to use a simple environment to create a very large effect for the user. Please, when you build this and you have others experience it, keep in mind that there's quite a health risk and that people can easily fall, hurt themselves, run into furniture, and even completely freak out, because if you have a user that has acrophobia, so fear of heights, there's really a good chance that an experience like this will absolutely trigger them and will cause them to possibly have a panic attack. So please be warned, this is a very easy way to create a powerful experience in virtual reality and to really showcase what virtual reality can do. So without further ado, let's get started. All the different assets that I put into this scene here are available for free, and I'll show you where I got them so you can assemble the scene for yourself. Now here under Objects, we have a terrain. It's the standard Unity terrain. If you don't have it available, so if you right-click here, create 3D object, terrain. If it's not available, then make sure that starting from Unity 2018.1, there is something called a package manager on the window. The package manager looks like this. Under all built-in packages, there's a terrain package, and you have to make sure that this is imported and enabled in order to use Unity terrains. Once you create a terrain, you can look into your inspector, go to terrain settings, and I set my terrain to 10 by 10 kilometers. That is to make sure that there's plenty of terrain around us, even though we will be able to see some of the dark in the background where there's no terrain. I just wanted to make sure that we're not worried about falling off the face of the earth, because we're already going to be worried about falling off the skyscraper. I then went into painting mode, and I used the standard grass texture that comes with Unity, and just colored everything with grass. Now keep in mind we're very high up here, and we also applied some fog to the scene so that you won't actually see a lot of the grass down here. Next, we have our buildings. Now, those are 2 skyscrapers here. I'm not super happy with the skyscrapers just because it is a free model from TurboSquid. Now, I first checked the Unity Asset Store and there were no free models available that looked like decent skyscrapers. So I went to TurboSquid and there's a number of them available. I chose this one here and I thought I can use the OBJ model, and I did, but it doesn't come across with the texture. It doesn't look that great. So there's probably other better models. Maybe you could use, a tower like this, where it's available as an FBX file, which is good. And secondly, you would then just place the plank just going out into nowhere and without connecting 2 buildings. But it's really up to you what kind of experience you want to build. Just look at any of these models. Now, if you look for anything, then just filter them by price. And I just selected 3 models here. Okay. Now, I actually have those intersecting with the ground. It doesn't really matter because you won't be able to see anything down here. I actually started out, instead of using those skyscrapers, to just use some cubes. Those are just some primitives, and I slapped a concrete texture on it. But then I thought, when I'm here on my plank and looking down, I kind of want to at least get sort of the silhouette of the side of the building with some windows and so on, to have a better effect of scale and size. I don't think it influenced it too much when I compare walking across in both scenarios, but I think once you have a better model, like a more detailed model with a nice facade here and windows and maybe even some rooftop details with maybe some rooftop terrace or something like that, then I think this would actually have a better effect than any of either the cubes or the skyscraper that I'm using here. Now, our plank is nothing but a cube primitive, and I scaled it to be about 10 meters long. And I will talk about the scaling and the play area in a little bit, but for now it's just a cube, and I applied a wooden texture to it. Now, the wooden texture you can find either straight from Google Images, where you have to make sure under Tools you check for the license that you can use. And if you use a label for reuse with modification, you most likely get something like Pixabay or other sites where you get images for free. Problem with those is that they're not tiled, or if you tile them, then there's seams. So the better option is to go to textures.com, which used to be cgtextures.com. You have to register yourself, log in, and then you can find seamless textures that you can download And it asks for credits, but you get those credits for a free account, I think like 15 each day or something like that. Or you can download at least a couple of textures each day for free. And then you can find a seamless one, download it. And I did this for wood planks by just searching for wood plank. And also searching for concrete, I found a concrete texture for free. And then I just import those. I create materials and assign, so create a plank material, assign the texture, use a standard shader, and that's all there is. Now, this one here is quite stretched and it doesn't look that great, but it doesn't matter too much because when I'm walking across here, I probably won't care too much about the texture details because I'm worried that I'm going to fall off the skyscraper. So just find a texture that you like and then apply it to the plank, to the concrete slab down here, which is the next thing. I just use it sort of as a floor so that it makes sense to have cars down there, sort of like a street or something. It doesn't matter too much what you use down there, whether that's asphalt or concrete, either way. The next thing I created was the skyline back here. So this is our view direction. We're going to look this way. And we now have these buildings back there just in front of our horizon, just so to give us an illusion that there's something in the back there, to just not have a complete bare environment. And those are just cubes, so there's nothing special about them, just cubes that are scaled. Actually, we might scale those up a little bit more because I increased the size of my skyscrapers a little bit. All right, there we go. Those are buildings. And with the fog that we have enabled, you won't really see any details. You won't see that there's no textures applied or anything. Now, the next thing that we did is I created some cars. I imported some cars. The car is from the Unity Asset Store, 3D low poly car for games by Ruslan. And I imported that and created a couple of copies. They're low poly. I created a few copies down here without much of an impact on performance. And that is really just that when we're looking down here, we get a sense of scale by comparing it to something that we know the size of. Because this building could be, any height, we don't really know. But having a car down here gives us a good indication that we're fairly high up, and that's a really good reference point for our brain to kind of process. I first thought about using people, but people looking from that far up, you barely see, and sort of just from top down, you really just see a head and nothing else. So I think a car in a bright color is probably the best thing we can do here. Next, we have the skybox. Now, I went for an evening sky to better match our ambience, sort of the fog and the doomy outlook of walking, across this plank. I figured a nighttime sky would be better. So I went to the Unity Asset Stores, search for Skybox, and here in Price Range, I dragged the slider all the way to the left to get free assets. And the first one that came up here is the Skybox, and I think it's a really nice one. And that's what we use. Now, in order to apply the Skybox, you have to go to Window, Rendering, Lighting Settings. And here at the very top under Environment, you can choose your Skybox material. Now at the bottom here, you can also enable your fog. And I created a fog with just a fairly low density so that we can just sort of mask the background a little bit to avoid really showing that there's nothing in the background here and there's no details whatsoever on those buildings or anything. All right, now that's the lighting settings. One next thing that we did is we imported the camera. Now let's disable this camera rig for now. What I started out with was a normal camera, just a standard camera that is in any Unity scene. And when we get to File, Build Settings, and Player Settings, the moment you go to XR settings and enable virtual reality supported, and in this case I chose OpenVR because I'm using HTC Vive. Now, the moment you enable this, any camera will automatically get tracked. So if you now have an HTC Vive, I can just play this. Actually, for my testing rig here, I have Oculus Rift, and already even this normal camera just gets tracked, and that's great. Sorry for the noise. Now, that works well, but the problem is that if I'm actually using this with the HTC Vive and I want to step out on the plank, I don't really know where my play space is. And this is for room scale setups. Now, obviously, we're using this with a room scale setup because we want to move around and actually walk on the plank. Now, without any indication of where the room is and where our play area is, we have to guess. And that kind of has us kind of trying to implement something to recenter our head-mounted display, which doesn't really work. With room scale, you cannot just use the recenter functionality that comes with Unity's XR. And that then I used the parent object and all that. It really just does a lot of back and forth and trying to figure out where the play space really is, and then adjusting the camera accordingly or being able to like warp around and things. It's just really tricky. So I kind of scrapped that, and I went with SteamVR since I was going with SteamVR anyway in terms of the HTC Vive. So I imported SteamVR, and here on the SteamVR in our prefabs folder, we have this camera rig, and you can just drag and drop it in here. That's what I did. And with this camera rig, you already have this outline here of where we think our play space is going to be. My actual play space is actually looking slightly differently because I have it in a different room and differently set up. But this is pretty close because this is probably about 2 by 3.5 meters or so. And you can already see that I know where my play space starts, so I'm usually over here. So I can already set this up so that it will work for my particular configuration, and I can walk up here and then take a couple steps out here onto this plank. Now keep in mind that I have no intention of walking all across to the other building. There's a couple of reasons for this, but it's really a design decision for you, what kind of experience you want. Whether, first of all, you don't want another building over here at all, and you just want to walk out into the void. That's fine. I wanted this other building here sort of as a reference and sort of having some visuals of, otherwise everything would be kind of just empty down here, and that would be a fairly bad experience because it reveals that our environment isn't very complex and we're really just kind of faking most of it. So I have this other building here, and I want enough space so I can put a couple cars down there. So that's why I chose about 10 meters, and I have enough space to put 2 cars down there. The other thing I want to avoid is if somebody walks out here and then starts wobbling around and kind of feels like they're falling off. I want to avoid that their brain kicks in and says, hey, we're about to die. Let's jump over because we can make it. You definitely don't want to encourage any user to jump in virtual reality, especially if they're tethered to cable, like if anything is wired. Because then they're probably going to fall, run into furniture, and so on. So here's the quick health warning. Make sure that you don't encourage behavior you don't want to see. So first of all, clear the whole space so that there's a lower chance for the user to run into something. Secondly, you would expect the user to, if they're walking on a plank, that they probably fall to the side somewhere if they fall. So either you should stand there and support them if you're not the user and you have somebody else trying this, and be able to catch them. And you should also avoid having any furniture here where they can run into. Same goes for this other end here. So really make sure that you're safe and that your users are not going to be injured. One other warning is that if somebody has acrophobia, so fear of heights, they will probably like really struggle with this, and please ask them in advance. You probably don't want to force anybody out on this if they get a panic attack. You would definitely notice, and it would be a terrible experience. Now, experiences like this are actually used in therapy for exposure therapy. Now, please leave that to a clinician who has experience with this. Don't try to force people that are feeling uncomfortable or give them a push or anything like that. That's a terrible thing. Please do not do that. All right, but so I really cut this short so that we can only walk out those about 3 meters or so, and then that's plenty for me, and then I can jump off or just walk back and never reach the other side. And that's intentional, but you can change it to your liking. Now, one thing to note is that we are actually walking on a real plank. So I took a piece of wood and put it out in my test space, and that really enhances the experience. So without it, you're basically just, it might feel a bit scary, but the fact that you actually have to balance on this and that it corresponds to the actual virtual object here is fantastic for immersion. Now, I actually scaled this the width of this wooden plank here to a very narrow wooden plank that I'm using. In fact, it's so narrow that I can actually just barely set my foot on it, but it's wobbling so much on my carpet that I'm always just about to lose balance. Now, that's obviously a bit tricky and probably not the easiest experience for any user, but it really makes me much more afraid because I already feel like I'm very unstable when I'm taking my first step out. Now that really enhances it. So keep in mind, you might have to adjust the width of your wooden plank, or sort of how massive your actual wooden plank is if you have one. It really enhances everything. The one thing that I forgot to mention is the audio. I mentioned the audio is attached to the camera rig here. We have an audio source. Now, where did I get the audio from? It's from freesound.org. There's a user called Felix Blume, and he recorded a strong wind blowing in a plain of Anatolia. And it's a great sound. I really like it. It's sort of what I imagine, or what it feels like being on a high building when on a windy day. So it is a really good sound that I just put into this audio source. I left it as a 2D spatial blend. That is because there's no particular source where this strong wind is coming from. It's sort of just ambient sound that's supposed to be anywhere we go. So even if we walk out here, we don't want this to change in volume or anything like that. It's just everywhere. So I put it on the camera rig, spatial blend to 2D, and play on a wake loop. I turn down the volume a bit, and that should be it. That's really also going to enhance the experience. All right. So with this play space here, we actually place the play space at the level where our feet are going to be, where the floor is going to be, and then we just arrange it so that we start on one end of the play space and then walk across. That is pretty much all there is to say, apart from the fact that you probably will have to iterate a couple times. So really test this out, adjust the volume of the sound, adjust the width of the wooden plank to match your personal object that you're walking on, and really just like tweak things a little bit so that they feel more real. I highly encourage you to try out different skyscrapers, just because I'm not really fond of this one here. There's other ones that are probably much better. Probably ideally with an FBX object where all the textures come across properly and so on. So try it out, and then really enjoy walking on your plank. It's a terrifying experience. Really just taking that first step it's amazing how easily you can trick your brain. Now, if you have any questions, or if you have any feedback, or if you want to show me screenshots of your environment or a video of how you actually walk your plank at home, please post below. I'm very curious. Would love to see it. And I hope you enjoy this. And it's really very easy to set up. So give it a go. It shouldn't take very long, 10 minutes or so. And yeah, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time, unless you fall down. And well, then I probably won't see you again. Anyway, thanks for watching. Cheers.